Let's get some more analysis on this. Scott Lucas, who is a professor of international politics at Birmingham University in the UK, is also joining us here on the show. Scott, good to have you on the show. With Blinken in Brussels, I'm thinking this is just a perspective of them saying, this is an opportunity for us to show, what I mean by us, the Biden administration, that, we are ready for change and sort of to turn the page on the previous administration's America First policy.
Well, the starting point is it just puts the adults back in the room because of two shocks that have occurred over the past 4 years. You mentioned one of the shocks, which has been the chaotic, very unpredictable Trump foreign policy, which quite often treated Europe as an adversary rather than as an ally. And the second shock is Brexit. And that is the United Kingdom's departure from the EU, of course, removes a major player from Europe. But it also has meant that Europe has had to rebuild as in a sense of who are we, what are we doing, not only for ourselves economically, but what are we doing as one of the key blocs in the world? Well, this is the first opportunity to try to deal with both of those shocks now in 2021, and then add in the specific immediate issues, which your correspondent and you have mentioned, such as how do you deal with Russia, how do you deal with China in a way which doesn't emphasize confrontation, but probably find some way of coexistence with Beijing, if not necessarily with Moscow.
When it comes to the secretary's meetings, especially with EU leaders, do you think it is fair to say that Washington is very keen in terms of bringing on board Brussels, in terms of forming this united front against the rising threat that China is?
But I would take that in part. I mean, first of all, you'll hear this term concert of democracies, alliance of democracies. Put that aside. Think about this in practical and not ideological terms. And that is when you're dealing with a key international player like China, you want to make sure that you're on the same page and have as many people there as possible. But I wouldn't present it in terms of this antagonistic relationship to start off with. I mean, look at Antony Blinken's words in his key speech earlier this month, which is competitive where we must be, but also, as it were, cooperative where we can be, and adversarial where we should be. In other words, it depends on the case that you're dealing with China. Now, that's for the EU as well as the Americans. So how do you deal with China, which is this rising economic power? How do you deal with it in a way where it's not just simply a lose-lose, an ongoing trade war or economic war? How do you deal with it diplomatically when you're talking about issues which can raise tension in terms of different approaches to international relations? And how do you bring in human rights? Because that's a big difference. The Trump administration never focused on human rights, but the Biden administration has said, look, we are going to not necessarily want a new Cold War with China, but we will bring up the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province. We will bring up the crackdown on Hong Kong. In other words, we don't see this as being an either-or economics, human rights, or diplomacy policy. We want to bring all this together. Well, that's a tough task. That's a challenging task. And you need the Europeans with you rather than against you on it.
Scott, with the NATO meetings, we've talked about a lot of issues. China, Russia, obviously up there, but also high on the agenda is, what's going to happen in Afghanistan? The previous president, Donald Trump, had struck a deal with the Taliban to get pretty much all the troops out by May the 1st. Do you think there'll be any change by the new administration in terms of sticking to this?
The troops aren't coming out by May the 1st because Donald Trump said he had a deal. He never actually had a deal. What you had were two things. One is Trump saying, I want to get all the troops out. And secondly, you had the political talks going on, not only between the U.S. and the Taliban, but also the Afghan government, also players like Pakistan. And one is dependent on the other. Until you can get a political deal on the future of Afghanistan, a power sharing agreement, where you don't have what is an ongoing, effectively, internal war between the Taliban and the government, then you will not have a complete American withdrawal. You will not have a complete European withdrawal from the issue. So again, with the U.S. and Europe, focus on how they try to promote the political steps with Afghanistan, as well as, by the way, with another area of concern, which is the political steps with Iran and the attempt to get the United States back into the 2015 nuclear deal.
All right, Scott Lucas, always a pleasure having you on the NewsHour. We do appreciate it. Thank you very much.